The Center for Procurement Excellence is a nonprofit member organization with a mission of educating, promoting, and advocating for better RFP processes. Join CPE today and make your RFPs faster and more transparent. Membership also includes discounts to all of our training and networking events. CPE hosts a variety of virtual and in-person networking and training events throughout the year. Visit our website to get signed up. CPE Speakers Bureau is available for your regional and national meetings and professional conferences. Contact us to learn more.
Welcome to Ask the RFP Doctor, CPE's monthly web series where we discuss the latest best practices in procurement and supply chain management.
So let's dive straight in here for today's teaching moment, where our topic is how do you ask for and then, of course, evaluate cost proposals, specifically in software requests for proposals. So if any of you have gone out to procure IT software, you know that that's its own bundle of fun and challenges. And so one of the areas that can bog us down there is how do we look at cost proposals within those types of RFPs. So we're going to narrow in specifically on those here and share just a few tips over the next few minutes with you all. So in this teaching moment, we're going to cover what is a cost proposal in a software RFP, how do you ask for it, and how do you evaluate it, and then we'll end with some of the common pitfalls to summarize things here in the teaching moment. So first up, what are cost proposals in software RFPs? Let me put this in context, and for those who have seen the RFP training course before, some of these might look a little familiar, just to make sure we're all on the same page with process. So for most RFPs, the general procurement process is something like this. Step one is internally with our business partners and project teams. Often we're working together to put together that statement of work to describe what the project is all about. Of course, this is known by many different names and terms. So scope of work, statement of work, specifications, this being an IT-focused, software-focused teaching moments. Business requirements, technical requirements, functional requirements, et cetera, all that requirement gathering that we have to do up front. It's basically, what it is we're hiring that vendor to do. That gets worked on first. It gets plugged into a high-performing RFP. Then in come the vendor proposals. Typically part of that proposal is their cost proposal, of course. We evaluate those, we pick who the best proposal and vendor is for our project, and then get into the whole contracting process. So this is kind of the big picture steps we're talking about here. Also, we cover this in detail in the RFP training course, the whole structure of a solid RFP, your statement of work, what you're purchasing, along with how the whole RFP process works. Those who are familiar with this course will know that we spent some time talking about proposal forms. So we at CPE are big fans of having standard specific proposal forms for your vendors to complete. And so of course, when we get to our cost proposal forms for an IT software project, it'll be no different. This is exactly where in the RFP we would recommend that this goes. You have a standard form to collect your cost proposals from your software vendors. That's the idea. So how do you ask for it? What does the form look like? Well, it would be just like this. So we just have a one-page, pretty simple form asking for costs related to your annual licensing and support, your one-time implementation, and your total cost. And so there you go. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. No, I'm just kidding. That's too small for you to read. I know that. Let me go a little forward here. So let me zoom in. So here's what it would look like in a one-page printout here. So the key things to point out. So we've broken it into three areas. One, for software, of course, you've got your ongoing costs, typically annual type of costs. Number two, your one-time implementation and setup costs. That's to get the software deployed. For some software types, that's a major lift, and so it can be some pretty big dollars there. Other times, it's not as substantial. And then your total cost would be to sum everything up. We are, as you can see here, we like using the standard form. Key things that we'll point out. It's good to keep this very quantitative or numeric. Like we want to have a specific standardized table that your vendors can populate. They all come back looking the same, and you can try to compare dollars to dollars. If we keep this more open-ended, it's tough to run through all the different formats that we can see. So keep it standard, keep it simple. We are big fans of a 5-year look ahead. Now, not every software vendor is going to, jump into the 5-year contract type of thing. Some have 3-year pricing, some have more, but the idea is You want a standard basis of comparison that projects out into the future. We find 5 years to be a pretty good balance. So that's what we'd recommend. And then, of course, your one-time implementation, some key areas that are broken out. But ultimately, you're concerned then with getting an apples to apples view of your total cost down here at the bottom. So let me go through that a little bit more here. If you want some more zoomed in slides, that will be available with the recording and as downloadable slides after the session here. This is what we do for your annual licensing and support costs. Notice that we do use the all other cost category, so you should capture everything comprehensively, get you your subtotals, sum up across the 5 years. Easy peasy for you to then evaluate, which we'll talk about here shortly. Same thing for your one-time implementation and setup costs. So that gets all built in as well with a nice overall subtotal. And you take those two numbers, your licensing and support costs across 5-year time horizons and your one-time implementation cost, sum it all up. And that gives you a grand total cradle to grave type of cost from on a 5-year planning horizon. So hopefully if it's a major software upgrade, say an ERP system or a payroll system or an asset management system, ideally your organization's planning longer than that. Those type of systems are like every decade or so, perhaps, that we are replacing them. But this gives us a good standard recommendation that we can take a look at for doing some cost comparisons. So there's that. Using that form, the next piece would be how do we evaluate it? And the answer here is pretty simple. Is you take the responses to that cost proposal form, take the grand total numbers and plug it into your evaluation matrix where you're keeping track of your full evaluation process. So you can see here the way that I personally like to do it is I get the total 5-year cost wrapped up in there. I like to also show for reference what an average annual cost looks like and the implementation costs. Not that I'm weighting those in because that's all wrapped up in my 5-year total, but just gives a good sense for people to quickly view, see, and digest. So I just use the numbers is the basic point here. We're big fans when it comes to cost. Use the quantitative dollar values. You're not trying to pass judgments on this or evaluate 1 through 10. How much do we like it? It's just what are the raw numbers and let's evaluate them head to head. And then there's the rest of your evaluation process. That's more of the qualitative review. So another zoomed in view of this is to show you that you're really just taking those grand total numbers and plugging them in to get your final thing that's going into the evaluation matrix. Of course, you've got further breakdown in that form itself, but what you're really trying to evaluate is you're trying to get an apples to apples sense of where do the costs stack up for the project. And so that's what we'd recommend is, I should have had Gene Simmons on here because we're all about keep it simple, all about the KISS method. So, put the numbers into the matrix, tally them up, and you're good to go. However, as simple as that sounds, there are some common pitfalls that you should be aware of. So these are some of the things that we see. We can be tempted. I personally have been tempted. So these are all from my personal pain and experience, and I think we've all been here and done this. So this is not passing judgment. This is just pitfalls we can fall into. So number one, if we're very open-ended with our how we solicit cost proposals from our vendors, we don't provide them that standardized form. We just let them submit on their own format. Then we have to go through and translate their format and find a way to add everything up and get the grand totals and put it into our evaluation matrix, however we're going to do that. And that's just a lot more difficult for us to analyze. It's more prone to us making mistakes. It's going to take more time. And there's no guarantee the vendors are going to provide that to you in the format that you're actually looking for it in. And so that's one pitfall. The other pitfall is kind of the opposite. Is we go too detailed. We go over the top. We ask for all these in-depth cost breakdowns. And what you tend to see there is we're trying to get all this information, and vendors will then add in assumptions and caveats and disclaimers to try to explain things more. Because especially in IT software, there's a lot of guessing sometimes that happens early on until you get into a full discovery process as part of your deployments. Or we'd strongly recommend a detailed risk-based partnering process for a major IT deployments. And so you're going to see a lot of vendors trying to cover their bases this way. And then that makes it so it's no longer apples to apples because different assumptions, different caveats, different disclaimers mean that those prices no longer mean the same thing across each of the vendors. And that's a challenge. And the other big thing is we can get too complex. So we can make it difficult, provide challenging formats. We ask for all these different scenarios, and that can overwhelm our vendors and cause them to make mistakes. Let me give you a quick example of that, and then we will close out our teaching moment. So a quick example of that. Here, this is from my own experience, so I only have myself to blame here. Nobody's fault but mine. But you've got a big spreadsheet here, and the first thing you'll notice when I'm asking for my cost is I've got 5 different scope areas for one project. So already that's a little confusing because the vendors have to then track along with how I, as a client, am defining those areas. Where are the boundaries between them? That's injecting some risk. I've then asked for discounts and savings and all these different combinations and those types of things. That's confusing. It's not going to be apples to apples. I've got 5 different tabs in my glorious spreadsheet here. That's frustrating for vendors to flip through. And then each of those tabs is a big old spreadsheet. And this is tough to get through. It's not a simple cost form, right? And so, this is a while back, but the lesson learned is that you get vendors interpreting that form differently. It's difficult for them to navigate it. Then it's difficult for us as a client to evaluate things. And then in that case, we actually had about 30% of vendors who declined to bid, and they all gave the usual excuses, right? We're just busy. We don't think it's a great fit. Thought you wanted to bundle it all up with all those scope areas, and I'm sure the reason wasn't my horrible cost form in that case, but did it help or did it hurt is the question. So that's just an example of being too overly complex. And so, in summary, your cost form should also go hand in hand with your statement of work. You should, as a client, be able to understand the major cost drivers for the particular software system and suppliers and marketplace that you're going out to market for, and have some type of reasonable benchmark for the vendors to bid to, so that when they are using your form, they're using it in the same way. So you need to be able to understand in the software world, how are vendors pricing their systems? Are they basing it upon licenses, upon transactions, number of employees, based upon data storage, et cetera, et cetera? There's so many different types. We need to have some knowledge of that so we can try to build that into the cost form. We like to set a clear benchmark for our vendors to propose on, so it is apples to apples, and that's going to be based upon your statement of work and defining those major cost drivers. And so that's all part of it as well. So if you've done a good job setting that benchmark, defining your statement of work, very simple cost form like this gives you the apples to apples dollars that you need to then plug into your evaluation matrix.
This has been Ask the RFP Doctor, brought to you by the Center for Procurement Excellence.